All right, we've all heard this before, that you need carbohydrates to perform in sports, particularly at a high level. We hear this from various influencers, even many sports scientists will promote this, and this is based on what they say is decades of science. However, new research is coming to light, which seems to show a little bit more nuance around this, and that carbohydrates may not yield the best performance and may not be necessary in certain situations. So let's talk about that in this video. We primarily have three places in the body where we store significant amounts of carbohydrate or glucose. The storage form of glucose is glycogen in our muscles, which is a large portion, about 400 to 500 grams, our liver, which is slightly smaller at about 122 grams, and then a very tiny amount that's circulating in our blood in the form of blood glucose. Now, exercise can deplete all of these as just, basically functioning depletes some of that. And so what has been traditionally thought of as the main fuel for our muscles is the muscle glycogen. As it breaks down, it's an immediate source of glucose, immediate source of fuel, and aids in performance. And while that certainly is true, new research is showing that what ultimately may be regulating performance is not so much the glycogen stores directly, but more importantly, the blood glucose, and certainly the blood glucose as it is sensed by the brain. Now let me get into a little more detail on that. Okay, normally our blood glucose is held in a steady state, usually between about 70 and 100 milligrams per deciliter at rest. And that is held in position by a number of hormones: insulin, glucagon, cortisone, norepinephrine. These things all work very hard to maintain it within that range. And if it starts to drift out of that range and gets too high, insulin is secreted. If it is getting too low, then those other hormones will be secreted to maintain that. Primarily, it's acting on the liver. The liver has a direct impact on blood glucose, whereas the muscles have very minimal impact on blood glucose. Remember, the glucose in the muscles are metabolized by the muscle cells themselves and don't really participate to the blood glucose pool outside of producing lactate, which is then turned into glucose again via gluconeogenesis by the liver. So it has an indirect effect on there. But as blood glucose falls as we exercise, our brain senses that, and it tends to shut down performance to protect ourselves. Okay, one sort of concern that I hear being bandied about is the fact that if you're in a low carb state, you won't have to rely on the catabolism of muscle, that is burning muscle and the amino acids to produce glucose to support gluconeogenesis. Well, what we know is that in a chronically adaptive state, that basically is not occurring to any significant degree. Most of the gluconeogenesis is occurring from recycled glucose through things like lactate reshuttling via the Cori cycle. There